The day I discovered my children had planned a family vacation without me was the same day I received my retirement bonus, a check so substantial it took my breath away. 35 years of nursing, of missed holidays and overnight shifts, of holding strangers' hands through their final moments while my own children celebrated birthdays without me. All of it culminated in this moment, this perfect collision of heartbreak and opportunity. As I sat at my kitchen table, staring at the email from James with its thoughtlessly attached vacation itinerary that didn't include my name, I made a decision. If I wasn't good enough for their family vacation, perhaps I was finally good enough for the life I'd always put on hold. My fingers trembled as I clicked confirm on the luxury Mediterranean cruise I'd been eyeing for years. Sometimes, the most powerful thing you can do is choose yourself, especially when no one else will. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. I always believed that sacrifice was the purest form of love. That's what my mother taught me, watching her care for my father as Parkinson's slowly claimed him. That's what I carried into my marriage with Frank, working night shifts at Portland County Hospital while he pursued his business dreams. And it's what defined my relationship with my children, James and Diane, after Frank died suddenly when they were just 10 and 7. My name is Eleanor Parker, Ellie to my friends, Mom to my children, and Nana to my grandchildren. For 35 years, I was also Nurse Parker to countless patients who passed through our hospital's intensive care unit. I was the nurse who stayed late, who picked up holiday shifts so others could be with their families, who held phones to dying patients, years during COVID when their families couldn't enter the hospital. "You're an angel, Ellie," my supervisor would say, approving yet another overtime request. I wasn't an angel. I was a widow with 2 children and a mortgage. Every extra hour meant new shoes for growing feet. Every holiday shift meant college, application fees. Every overnight meant braces and prom dresses and eventually help with down payments on my children's first homes. James became a financial advisor. Ironic, since I'd never managed to accumulate much wealth myself. Diane went into marketing, climbing the corporate ladder with the determination I'd always admired in her. They both married well. James to Melissa, an interior designer whose parents owned half the real estate in our city, and Diane to Thomas, a corporate lawyer whose family vacationed in places I couldn't pronounce. I was proud of them. Desperately, achingly proud. The kind of pride that catches in your throat when you sit in the back row of their college graduations wearing the same dress you've carefully maintained for 5 years because new clothes weren't in the budget. The kind of pride that burns when you give them your savings for their house down payments while you continue to live in the same modest 3-bedroom home you've patched and repaired for decades. "Mom, you work too hard," James would say, his concern seemingly genuine. "Mom, you should take a vacation sometime," Diane would suggest, knowing I never had. In my dreams, I traveled. I visited the ancient ruins of Greece, wandered through Italian villages, watched sunsets over the Mediterranean Sea. I kept a travel brochure in my nightstand drawer, its pages worn thin from years of late-night dreaming. But dreams don't pay bills, and my children's needs always came first. Dr. Robert Chen, my colleague and friend for over 20 years, never understood my relentless self-sacrifice. "Ellie, your children are adults now," he'd remind me over coffee, in the hospital cafeteria. "When will you start living for yourself?" I'd smile and change the subject. Living for myself seemed selfish when my children still needed me, or at least when I believed they did. When James and Melissa had the twins, Zach and Emma, I used all my vacation days to help them adjust. When Diane had Sophie, I drove to Seattle every weekend for 3 months. When the children needed a sitter, I rearranged my schedule. When they needed money for private schools, I dipped into what little savings I had. "Mom's always there when you need her," James once said at Thanksgiving dinner, raising a glass in my direction. The compliment warmed me then, Later, I would understand it differently. By the time I turned 62, my body had begun to protest the decades of 12-hour shifts and emotional labor. My knees ached from years of standing. My back spasmed from lifting patients. The hospital was offering early retirement packages, and Dr. Chen urged me to consider it. "You've given enough, Ellie," he said, his eyes kind behind his glasses. "It's time." I worried about money. Nurses' pensions aren't particularly generous. But I had managed to save a little over the years. Not enough for luxury, but enough for modest comfort if I was careful. Besides, I reasoned, retirement would give me more time with my grandchildren, more opportunities to be useful to my busy children. My retirement party was small but heartfelt. The ICU staff presented me with a plaque commemorating my service. Dr. Chen gave me a first-edition copy of my favorite novel. My children sent flowers with a card signed by all of them, though neither could attend due to unmissable work commitments. That night, alone in my house with my plaque and my book and my flowers, I felt a strange hollowness I couldn't quite name. It wasn't sadness, exactly. It was more like standing in a room where furniture has been removed, a sense of absence where something solid used to be. The first few weeks of retirement were disorienting. I kept waking at 5 a.m., reaching for scrubs that weren't there. I called the hospital twice to check on patients before remembering they weren't my responsibility anymore. I waited for my children to call, to ask for help with the grandkids now that I had free time. Those calls rarely came. "We've got a nanny now, Mom," James explained when I offered to watch the twins during their spring break. "It's easier with our schedules." "Sophie's in this amazing day camp," Diane told me when I suggested visiting for a week. "She's barely home, and our guest room is being renovated." I tried not to feel hurt. They had their own lives, their own routines. They didn't need me the way they once had. This was natural, healthy even. Wasn't this what I'd worked for? Their independence? Their success? Then came the retirement bonus. The hospital's board had approved additional packages for long-term employees, and as one of the longest-serving nurses, my amount was substantial, $175,000. When I received the notification, I actually called Human Resources to confirm it wasn't a mistake. "No mistake, Nurse Parker," the HR director assured me. "The board specifically mentioned your dedication during COVID. Consider it hazard pay, retroactively awarded." That same day, I received an email from James. The subject line read, "Winter Family Vacation Plans. Please keep dates open." My heart lifted. Perhaps they did want to include me in their lives after all. I opened the attachment, a detailed itinerary for a 2-week stay at an exclusive ski resort in Aspen. The document listed accommodations for James, Melissa, the twins, Diane, Thomas, Sophie, and Melissa's parents, Howard and Patricia. There was no mention of me. Thinking it must be an oversight, I called James immediately. "Oh, Mom," he said, his voice heavy with that particular tone people use when explaining something obvious to someone slow. "I just wanted you to know our dates. So you wouldn't plan anything that week. We'll need you to check on our house while we're gone." I'm not invited? The question sounded pathetic even to my own ears. "It's not really your thing, Mom. It's a ski resort, and, well, at your age. Plus, Howard and Patricia are covering most of the cost, and they wanted it to be just immediate family." "I'm not immediate family?" The hollowness inside me expanded, becoming a vast, echoing space. "You know what I mean. Look, we'll do something with you when we get back. Maybe lunch. I've got to run. Client meeting." After he hung up, I sat motionless at my kitchen table, staring at the retirement bonus notification on my laptop screen, and the family vacation itinerary beside it. 35 years of sacrificing my wants, my needs, my dreams for them. 35 years of believing that love meant putting others first. Always. And now, I wasn't even immediate family. My phone pinged with a text from Dr. Chen. Did you get the bonus? Time for that Mediterranean cruise you've always talked about. My cruise. The one I'd dreamed of for decades. The one I'd mentioned so often that my colleagues used to tease me about it. The one I'd never taken because there was always someone else who needed the money more than I needed to see the world. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. With fingers that suddenly felt steady, I opened my laptop browser and navigated to a luxury cruise line's website. The Mediterranean Grand Voyage, 18 days, Barcelona to Athens, stopping at ports I'd only seen in dreams. The presidential suite was available for a last-minute booking, leaving in exactly 3 weeks. The cost was astronomical, nearly half my bonus. In my entire life, I had never spent that much money on myself at once. I clicked Book Now without a second thought. As the confirmation email arrived in my inbox, something shifted inside me. That hollow space began to fill with something unfamiliar. Not resentment, not anger, but a quiet, steady flame of self-worth that had been smothered for far too long. For the first time in 35 years, I had chosen myself, and it felt like coming home to a place I'd forgotten existed. Part 2. The revelation that changed everything. I told no one about the cruise. Not Dr. Chen, not my few remaining friends, from the hospital, and certainly not my children. Instead, I quietly began preparing. I bought new luggage, sleek, expensive suitcases that wouldn't embarrass me on a luxury ship. I purchased resort wear, evening gowns, comfortable walking shoes for excursions. I even scheduled appointments for a haircut, manicure, and facial. Indulgences I'd never allowed myself before. With each purchase, each preparation, I felt both guilty and exhilarated. The voice in my head, the one that sounded suspiciously like my mother's, kept asking, "Who do you think you are?" The newer, quieter voice answered simply, "I'm Ellie. Not just Nurse Parker, not just Mom or Nana, just Ellie." 2 weeks before my departure, Diane called. This was unusual enough to make me worry. "Mom, we need to discuss something," she said, her voice carrying that professional edge she used when negotiating contracts. "Is everything all right? Is Sophie okay?" "Everyone's fine," she replied impatiently. "It's about the house." "My house?" I looked around my modest living room with its worn furniture and faded curtains. "Yes, Thomas and I have been talking. And with you retired now, that house is really too much for you to maintain. The stairs, the yard. It's not practical." My grip tightened on the phone. "I manage just fine, Diane." "That's not the point. The market in Portland is hot right now, and your neighborhood has appreciated significantly. If you sold, you could downsize." The pause before downsize told me everything I needed to know. "And where would I downsize to?" I asked, keeping my voice neutral. "Well," Diane hesitated, "there's a really nice senior living community near James. Very active, lots of people your age. They have nursing care available if you need it." "I'm 62, Diane, not 92, and I'm a nurse, or was until recently. I think I'll know when I need care." She sighed, that weary sound I'd heard her make when explaining something to Sophie. "Mom, be practical. This is about planning for the future. Your pension will only go so far, and we're concerned about your long-term security." Translation: they were concerned about inheriting my house before its value decreased, and they were concerned about potentially having to support me financially later. "I appreciate your concern," I said carefully, "but I'm not ready to move to a senior community. I like my home. I've lived here for 30 years. We're just trying to help, Mom. Think about it, okay? We can discuss it more when we get back from Aspen." After we hung up, I sat in my kitchen, the kitchen where I'd bandaged scraped knees and helped with science projects and cried alone after Frank died, and laughed until tears ran down my cheeks. All this time, I'd been worrying about being useful to my children, and they'd been making plans to warehouse me. The next day, James called. This was clearly a coordinated effort. "Mom, Diane mentioned she talked to you about selling the house," he began without preamble. "She did. And you're not receptive to the idea." "I'm not." He sighed. "Mom, I'm saying this as a financial advisor. Holding on to that house doesn't make sense. You're asset rich and cash poor. You need to liquidate now while the market is favorable. And move to that senior community Diane mentioned. It's really nice, Mom. I've toured it. They have gardening clubs. You like gardening." I looked. Out at my backyard, at the rose bushes I'd planted when James was born, the maple tree we'd planted with Frank's ashes. "I have a garden here, James." "Mom." His voice took on that particular strain of patience that felt like anything but. "We're trying to make sure you're taken care of. Your retirement bonus won't last forever." I froze. "How do you know about my retirement bonus?" A pause. "Melissa's cousin works in the hospital administration. She mentioned it." Of course, information traveled quickly when it concerned money. "The bonus is already allocated," I said simply. "Allocated? To what?" His voice sharpened. James, the financial advisor, couldn't fathom his fiscally cautious mother having already spent a large sum. "My future," I replied. "Mom, tell me you didn't do something foolish with that money. That needs to be your safety net." The condescension in his voice, the absolute certainty that I, who had managed to raise 2 children alone on a nurse's salary, couldn't possibly make sound financial decisions, ignited something in me. "James, I've managed my finances for 35 years without your advice. I'll continue to do so. But I need to go. I have an appointment." I hung up before he could respond, something I'd never done before. My phone immediately rang. Again. I silenced it and went upstairs to try on the midnight blue evening gown I'd purchased for the captain's dinner on the cruise. Standing before the mirror, I barely recognized myself, not because of the unaccustomed elegance, but because of the straight spine, the lifted chin, the eyes bright with something that looked remarkably like freedom. The calls continued over the next few days, growing increasingly urgent. I let them go to voicemail. The messages evolved from concern to frustration to barely veiled accusations of mental decline. "Mom, we're worried about you. Call us back." "Mom, this behavior isn't like you. We need to talk." "Mom, if you don't call back, we're going to have to come check on you. Is this some kind of cognitive issue? Are you okay?" The last one actually made me laugh out loud. I was more okay than I'd been in decades. Finally, 5 days before my departure, a text arrived from James. "Family meeting tomorrow at Riverside Grill, 6 p.m. Non-negotiable. We've made reservations." The Riverside Grill was one of the most expensive restaurants in Portland, a place I'd never been. Clearly, they were pulling out the big guns. This would be an intervention, Portland upper-middle-class style. I texted back, "I'll be there." That night, I made a few phone calls of my own, to my bank, to my lawyer, and to a real estate agent I'd known for years. By morning, several important changes had been set in motion. I arrived at the Riverside Grill exactly on time, dressed in a new outfit I'd bought for casual evenings on the cruise. Tailored pants, a silk blouse, and low heels. I'd had my hair styled that afternoon, not my usual trim at the budget salon, but a proper cut and color at the place where Melissa went. The maitre d' led me to a private dining room where James, Melissa, Diane, and Thomas were already seated, their expressions a unified front of concern. "Mom?" James stood as I entered, his relief evident. "You look different." You've done something to your hair, Diane added, her tone suggesting I'd committed some minor criminal act. I got a haircut, I confirmed, taking my seat. You look well, all of you. Excited about Aspen, I imagine. They exchanged glances. Thomas cleared his throat. Ellie, we've been very concerned about your recent behavior, he began, slipping into his lawyer voice. The missed calls, the sudden decisions about your finances. What decisions exactly? I asked mildly, unfolding my napkin. You mentioned the retirement bonus was allocated, James jumped in. What does that mean? What have you done with it? I spent it, I said simply. 4 pairs of eyes widened simultaneously. If the situation weren't so painful, it would have been comical. All of it? Melissa whispered, as though I'd confessed to a murder. A good portion, I conceded. The rest is in investments. Your husband gave me some excellent advice over the years, James. I finally took it. James looked momentarily pleased, before remembering he was supposed to be concerned. What did you spend it on, Mom? The waiter arrived to take drink orders. My children asked for various wines. I requested champagne. Champagne? Diane's eyebrows nearly reached her hairline. Since when do you drink champagne? Since today, I replied. It seemed appropriate. After the waiter left, Thomas leaned forward. Ellie, we're worried that you might not be thinking clearly, making impulsive decisions. It happens sometimes after major life changes like retirement. I appreciate your concern, I said, the phrase becoming my new mantra. But I'm perfectly clear-headed. Then explain the money, James demanded. What was so important that you spent your safety net? The champagne arrived. I took a sip, letting the bubbles dance on my tongue. It was delicious. All those years of avoiding indulgence, and I'd never known how wonderful simple pleasures could be. I bought a vacation, I said at last. 4 identical expressions of confusion greeted this announcement. A vacation? Diane repeated. Like a weekend somewhere? A cruise, actually. 18 days on the Mediterranean. Barcelona, Monaco, the Italian coast, Greek islands. I leave in 5 days. Silence descended on the table, thick and stunned. You're joking, James finally managed. I'm not. But that must have cost $80,000 for the presidential suite, I supplied. Plus another $15,000 for new clothes. Luggage, excursions, and spending money. Melissa actually gasped. The presidential suite? Mom, that's insane. That's not who you are. And there it was, the heart of the matter. That's not who you are. In their minds, I was frugal Nurse Parker, self-sacrificing mom, practical Nana who wore the same winter coat for 15 years and never took vacations. I was the safety net, the emergency childcare, the keeper of holiday traditions, the willing participant in their lives on their terms. I was not a woman who booked presidential suites or drank champagne or said no. Actually, I said quietly, you have no idea who I am. None of you do. Mom, James began, but I raised my hand. No, let me finish. For 35 years, I've put everyone else first. My patients, my colleagues, and most of all you, my children. I worked double shifts to pay for your college. I used my savings for your house down payments. I retired. Early, partly because you both hinted how helpful it would be to have me available for childcare. We never, Diane started. You did, I corrected gently. Maybe not in those exact words, but the expectation was clear, and I was prepared to continue that pattern until I saw the Aspen itinerary. They had the grace to look uncomfortable. It wasn't personal, Mom, James said weakly. It felt very personal to be excluded from a family vacation, especially when Melissa's parents were included. It felt even more personal to discover you only sent me the itinerary so I could house sit. The resort isn't really suitable for someone your age, Melissa offered, as though this excused everything. I'm a former intensive care nurse who hiked the Columbia River Gorge trails last month. I'm not infirm. That's not what we meant, Diane backpedaled. It's just, Howard and Patricia were paying, and they wanted it to be just immediate family, I finished for her. Yes, James explained that part. What neither of you seems to understand is that being relegated to house sitter status after everything I've done for you was clarifying. Thomas, ever the mediator, stepped in. I'm sure they didn't mean to hurt you, Ellie. But spending nearly $100,000 on a cruise seems like an extreme reaction. That money could have provided security for years. Or it could provide joy for 18 days, I countered. I've had enough security. I've had enough practicality. What I haven't had is joy. So this is what? Revenge? James demanded, his face flushing. We don't invite you to Aspen, so you blow your retirement on a cruise ship. I shook my head. Not revenge. Awakening. You helped me see that I've been waiting for permission to live my own life. Permission that would never come. So I gave it. To myself. The waiter returned to take our dinner orders. No one had looked at the menus. I ordered the most expensive steak on the menu. Rare. More shocked looks. Since when do you eat red meat? Diane asked. You always said it was too, expensive. It was too expensive when I was feeding 2 growing children on a single income, I agreed. It's not too expensive now. As the waiter departed, James leaned forward, his financial advisor face firmly in place. Mom, be reasonable. Cancel the cruise. You'll lose the deposit, but that's better than spending everything. We're concerned about your future. Are you? I asked quietly. Or are you concerned about who will pay for it? His face reddened further. That's unfair. Is it? Because the day after you learned about my retirement bonus, you and Diane both called to suggest I sell my house and move to a senior living facility, a facility that, coincidentally, would free you from any future financial obligation toward me and would convert my largest asset to cash. Thomas and Melissa shifted uncomfortably. Diane's eyes filled with tears, whether from guilt or frustration. I couldn't tell. We were trying to help, she insisted. No, you were trying to manage. There's a difference. I took another sip of champagne. But it doesn't matter now. I've made my decision. I'm taking this cruise. I've earned it. And after? James demanded. When the money's gone and you still have 20+ years to support yourself? What then? I smiled. I've taken care of that too. Their expressions turned wary. What does that mean? Diane asked. It means I've reviewed my finances with actual professionals who don't have a vested interest in my decisions. It means I've made arrangements that satisfy me. What arrangements? James pressed. I set down my champagne glass. I've sold the house. 4 mouths fell open simultaneously. You what? James nearly shouted. I sold the house. The market is excellent. Right now, as you both pointed out. The closing is in 3 days. I received an all-cash offer 20% above asking price. But where will you live? Diane stammered. I've purchased a small cottage in Cannon Beach. 1 level, low maintenance, ocean view. I move in after I return from my cruise. Cannon Beach? Melissa echoed. But that's 2 hours from Portland. 90 minutes without traffic, I corrected. A reasonable distance. But the grandchildren, James began, will always be welcome to visit, as will all of you. But on my terms, not as a convenient childcare service or house sitter. Diane's tears spilled over. Mom, you're being cruel. We never thought of you that way. Perhaps not consciously, I allowed, but your actions spoke clearly enough. So that's it? James's voice cracked slightly. You're just abandoning the family? The accusation stung, even through my newfound armor. I raised you. I supported you. I gave you everything I had for 35 years. I'm not abandoning anyone. I'm simply choosing to live the rest of my life for myself. By spending a fortune on a cruise and moving away from your grandchildren, Thomas summarized flatly. By spending a portion of my retirement bonus on an experience I've dreamed of for decades, I corrected. And by relocating to a home that suits my needs and brings me peace. The stakes arrived, mine perfectly rare, the others untouched as my children and their spouses struggled to absorb what was happening. I cut a piece and savored it, allowing myself to enjoy the moment despite the tension. There's one more thing you should know, I said after a few bites. I've updated my will. That got their attention. What changes? James asked cautiously. The proceeds from the house sale, after purchasing the cottage, have been placed in a trust. Half will go toward a nursing scholarship at Portland County Hospital. The other half will be divided among Zach, Emma, and Sophie when they turn 25. And us? Diane's voice was small. You've already received your inheritance, I said gently. The college educations, the house down payments, the child care, the emotional labor. You've received it all as I intended. The grandchildren will receive theirs in time, but with restrictions ensuring it goes toward education or housing, not vacations or luxuries. The silence that followed was profound. I can't believe you're doing this, James finally said, his voice hollow. I can't believe it took me so long, I replied. As I left the Riverside Grill that evening, the night air felt crisp against my skin. I'd ordered dessert, a $28 chocolate souffle, and eaten it slowly while my children and their spouses watched in stunned silence. When I finished, I'd paid the entire bill without discussion, leaving a tip that made the waiter's eyes widen. Then I'd gathered my new handbag, stood, and simply said, I love you all. I always will. But this is my time now. Their faces as I walked away would stay with me for a long time. A mixture of confusion, hurt, and something else. Something that looked almost like the first flicker of respect. My phone began ringing before I reached my car. I silenced it and drove home through streets I'd navigated for decades. The modest houses in my neighborhood glowed with warm light as families finished dinner, helped with homework, watched television together. Normal evenings in normal lives. I'd never had many of those. Between night shifts and second jobs and the constant push to provide more, be more, give more. At home, I moved through my evening routine mechanically, changing clothes, washing my face, making tea. Through the kitchen window, I could see the rose bushes silhouetted against the security. Light in the backyard. Soon they would belong to someone else. The thought brought a brief pang, quickly replaced by something lighter. I wouldn't have to prune them anymore. I wouldn't have to weed or mow or clean gutters or worry about the aging water heater. I could walk on the beach every morning instead. The calls and texts continued throughout the evening. I scrolled through them once, noting the progression from shock to anger to emotional manipulation. James. Mom, call me back immediately. We're not done discussing this. Diane. I can't believe you blindsided us like this. Is this some kind of midlife crisis? Melissa. The grandchildren will be devastated. How could you move so far away? From them? Thomas. Ellie, let's talk this through rationally. Major decisions shouldn't be made in emotional states. James again. You're throwing away decades of family connections over one misunderstanding. Is that really the legacy you want? Diane again. Mom, Zach asked about you tonight. He wants to know if you're going to his birthday next month. What am I supposed to tell him now? I set the phone aside without responding. Zach's birthday was 3 months away, not next month. Either Diane had forgotten, unlikely, or she was manufacturing emotional leverage. Neither possibility surprised me anymore. The next morning, I awoke to a knock at my front door. When I opened it, Dr. Robert Chen stood on my porch, his expression a mixture of concern and amusement. "I got 3 separate calls about you last night," he said by way of greeting. "Your children seem to think you've lost your mind." I laughed and ushered him inside. "Coffee? Please." As I moved around the kitchen, Robert settled at the table, the same spot he'd occupied during countless conversations over the years. As my colleague and friend, he'd been my sounding board through James's college disciplinary hearing, Diane's difficult pregnancy, and my own moments of doubt and exhaustion. "So," he said as I set a steaming mug before him, "a Mediterranean cruise in the presidential suite?" I smiled. "News travels fast." "James called me at 11 last night. He seemed to think I might have some special insight into your mental deterioration." "And do you?" Robert sipped his coffee thoughtfully. "I think 35 years of putting everyone else first will eventually create a breaking point in even the most selfless person." I nodded, grateful for his understanding. It wasn't even the Aspen trip, not really. It was the house-sitting request, the casual assumption that I should be grateful for whatever scraps of inclusion they offered. "While Melissa's parents were invited on the family vacation," Robert added. James mentioned that detail, though I don't think he realized its significance. "They never saw me as an equal part of their family," I said quietly. "I was the support staff." "And now you've resigned the position." Robert's eyes crinkled with approval. "Good for you, Ellie." We sat in comfortable silence for a moment. Through the window, morning light spilled across the garden. A hummingbird darted among the flowers I'd planted years ago, its wings a blur of iridescent green. "James also mentioned you've sold the house," Robert ventured. "Closing in 2 days. The new owners are a young couple with a baby on the way. They love the garden." "And you've bought a place in Cannon Beach?" "A little cottage near the water. 1 bedroom, a sunroom, a small garden that won't overwhelm me. It's perfect." Robert nodded slowly. "You've thought this through." "More than they realize." I hesitated, then added, "There's something I didn't tell them last night." Robert raised an eyebrow questioningly. "The retirement bonus wasn't the only financial windfall I received." His eyes widened slightly. "Oh?" I took a deep breath. This was something I hadn't spoken about to anyone yet. "Do you remember Mrs. Eleanor Whitman? The elderly woman you cared for during COVID? The one who had no family?" I nodded. "She was in the ICU for weeks. I was the only one who could visit her because of the restrictions. I read to her, held her hand, played her favorite music. When she recovered enough to leave, she made me promise to keep in touch." "Which you did, knowing you." "I visited her every Sunday for 2 years. Brought her flowers, groceries, whatever she needed. It wasn't a burden. I enjoyed her company. She had the most amazing stories about traveling the world as a young woman." Robert waited patiently as I gathered my thoughts. "She passed away 6 months ago. Her lawyer contacted me last month. She left me everything, her estate, her investments. Said I was the daughter she never had." "Everything?" Robert echoed. "How much are we talking about?" "Just over $2 million. The coffee mug froze halfway to Robert's lips. $2 million. Ellie, that's a life-changing, I finished for him. "I know. I couldn't believe it either. The lawyer had to show me the paperwork 3 times. "And you haven't told your children?" I shook my head. At first, I was in shock. Then I was planning how to divide it among them and the grandchildren. But after the Aspen email, after seeing how quickly they moved to manage my retirement bonus, I decided to wait, to think clearly about what I wanted. Hence the cruise, the cottage. Yes, but those came from the retirement bonus and the house sale. I haven't touched Mrs. Whitman's money. Robert leaned back in his chair, studying me with new eyes. $2 million. You could go anywhere, do anything. I know. A smile tugged at my lips. And I intend to, just not in the way they might expect. The doorbell rang, interrupting our conversation. I glanced at the clock, barely 9 in the morning. When I peered through the curtains, I saw James's car in the driveway. "It's James," I told Robert. "Apparently we're moving to the next phase of the intervention." Robert stood. "Want me to stay?" I considered for a moment, then shook my head. "I can handle this, but thank you for checking on me." "Always." He squeezed my shoulder as he passed. "Call me when you get back from your cruise. I want to hear all about it." I opened the door as Robert was leaving. James looked surprised to see him. "Dr. Chen," he nodded, then turned to me with accusation in his eyes. "You'll answer his calls, but not mine?" "He didn't call," I replied calmly. "He stopped by to check on me because you called him at 11 o'clock last night, suggesting I might be experiencing cognitive decline." James had the grace to look embarrassed. "I was worried about you." "No, you were upset that I made decisions without consulting you." "There's a difference." I stepped back from the doorway. "Would you like to come in? I just made coffee." He entered warily, as though entering unfamiliar territory rather than the home he'd grown up in. Perhaps it was unfamiliar now, his mother, making independent decisions, speaking her mind, refusing to be managed. In the kitchen, I poured him coffee and took a seat across from him at the table. He looked tired, his usually perfect hair slightly disheveled, his expensive shirt wrinkled. He'd come straight from home, not from his office. "Mom," he began, his voice carefully modulated into what I recognized as his client management tone. "I've been up all night thinking about our conversation. I'm sorry to hear that. You need your rest." He ignored this. "I understand that we hurt you by not including you in the Aspen trip. That was thoughtless, and I apologize." The apology sounded rehearsed but sincere enough. I nodded acknowledgement. "And I understand why you'd want to indulge in a nice vacation after working so hard for so many years," he continued. "You deserve it. But the presidential suite? The move to Cannon Beach? Changing your will? These are massive, life-altering decisions, and you made them all in what? A week? 2 weeks? Without discussing them with anyone who cares about you?" "I discussed them with my financial advisor, my real estate agent, and my lawyer," I pointed out. "All professionals with my best interests at heart." "But not with your family," he pressed. "Not with the people who love you and will be directly affected by these decisions. James, I've spent 35 years considering how my decisions would affect you and Diane. Every choice, from which shifts to work, to which neighborhoods, to live in, to which retirement date to select, was filtered through the lens of your needs, your convenience, your futures. For once, I made decisions based solely on what I want. And what you want is to move 2 hours away from your grandchildren." There it was, the emotional leverage I'd been expecting. What I want is peace, independence, joy. The cottage in Cannon Beach provides those things. "You could have those things here in Portland," he argued. "We could help you find a nicer place, maybe a condo downtown if you want to change. Somewhere without yard work, but still close to family." I studied my son's face, the face I'd loved from the moment the adoption agency placed him in my arms. He'd always been my practical child, the one who color-coded his toys and made pro-con lists for his college applications. He genuinely believed he was being reasonable, helpful even. "James, when was the last time you brought the twins to visit me? Not for a holiday, not because you needed childcare, but just to spend time with their grandmother?" He opened his mouth, then closed it again, thinking. The silence stretched uncomfortably. "It's been almost a year," I said gently. "Last May, when you were having your kitchen renovated and needed somewhere to have Sunday dinner." "We've been busy," he said defensively. "The kids have activities, Melissa has her design clients, I have the firm." "I understand," Everyone is busy. That's my point. Whether I live 15 minutes away or 90 minutes away won't significantly change how often I see the grandchildren. The distance is an excuse, not the real issue. Then what is the real issue? He demanded. Control, I said simply. You and Diane have always assumed you'd have control over my later years, my housing, my finances, my time. The Aspen trip just made it obvious. That's not fair, Mom. Perhaps not, but it's honest. I sighed, softening my tone. James, I'm not doing this to hurt you or punish you. I'm doing this because for the first time in my adult life, I have the freedom and resources to create exactly the life I want. Can you understand that? Can you be happy for me? He stared into his coffee cup, struggling visibly with the shift in our dynamic. I just don't want you to be alone. I won't be. Cannon Beach has a wonderful community. I've already joined their book club and signed up for watercolor classes at the community center. And you and your family are always welcome to visit. The cottage has a charming guest room with bunk beds the twins will love. Some of the tension eased from his shoulders. Bunk beds? And a window seat overlooking the ocean, I confirmed. Perfect for reading or watching for whales. A reluctant smile tugged at his lips. They would like that. See? Not such a catastrophe after all. He shook his head slowly. I still think you're making these decisions too quickly. The cruise, maybe that makes sense. But selling the house? Moving away? Couldn't you wait until after your trip? Give yourself time to think clearly? I reached across the table and covered his hand with mine. James, I've had 35 years to think about what I want. I don't need more time. He withdrew his hand gently. And what about us? Don't we deserve time to adjust to these changes? You'll have it. I'll be on the cruise for 18 days. By the time I return, the cottage will be ready, and you'll have had nearly 3 weeks to process everything. That's not much time, Mom. It's what we have. I stood and carried our empty mugs to the sink. Now, I have a busy day ahead. The movers are coming tomorrow to pack everything I'm keeping. The rest goes to charity or stays with the house. James remained seated, his expression troubled. So that's it? Decision made? No room for discussion? The decisions are made, I confirmed, but I'm always open to discussion about how we move forward from here, about how we reshape our relationship into something healthier for everyone. I don't see how any of this is healthy, he muttered. That's because you're still in shock. Give it time. I placed a hand on his shoulder. I love you, James. That hasn't changed and never will. But the way I express that love is changing. And that's good for both of us. He stood reluctantly. Diane wants to come by later. She's welcome any time before 7. I have dinner plans. His eyebrows rose. Dinner plans? With whom? Friends from the hospital. A retirement celebration they arranged before all this happened. He nodded stiffly. I'll tell her to come. By this afternoon, then. As I walked him to the door, he paused on the threshold. Mom, about the will. Is that really final? And there it was, the heart of his concern, laid bare. Not my happiness, not my independence, but the inheritance. The scholarship fund and the grandchildren's trusts are established, I said firmly. If you're asking whether you and Diane will receive direct inheritances, the answer is no. You've already received your share through decades of support. His face flushed. That's not what It's all right, James. You're a financial advisor. It's natural for you to think about these things practically. I softened my voice. But try to remember there's more to life than asset management. After he left, I stood on the porch watching his car disappear down the street. The morning had grown warm, neighborhood sounds filling the air, lawn mowers, children playing, someone practicing piano with a window open. Normal life continuing while mine transformed completely. Back inside, I returned to the task I'd been working on before Robert arrived, sorting photographs for packing. Albums filled with decades of memories lay open on the dining room table. James's first day of kindergarten, his gap-toothed smile brave despite his nervousness. Diane's high school graduation, her face serious and determined even then. Family, holidays, school events, ordinary moments preserved in fading color. I wasn't leaving these memories behind. They would come with me to the cottage, carefully packed and preserved. But looking at them now, I realized how many of the photos featured my children and how few included me. Always behind the camera, rarely in front of it. Always the chronicler of others' lives, rarely the subject of my own. That would change too. My phone chimed with a text message. I expected another plea from my children, but instead found a message from the cruise line. Your Mediterranean grand voyage embarks in 5 days. Click here to complete your pre-boarding information. A thrill of anticipation ran through me. 5 days until I stepped aboard that magnificent ship. 5 days until I began the adventure I'd postponed for decades. The front doorbell rang again. This time, I found Diane on the porch, her expression a careful mask of neutrality. Unlike James, she'd come prepared, dressed immaculately in one of her power suits, hair perfectly styled. James said you were available this afternoon, she said by way of greeting. I gestured her inside. Would you like tea or something stronger? Her eyebrows rose slightly at the latter offer. I never kept alcohol in the house when they were growing up. Another small economy to stretch the budget. Tea is fine, she said, following me to the kitchen. As I filled the kettle, she glanced around, noting the empty spaces where small appliances had already been packed. So you're really going through with this. The movers come tomorrow, I confirmed. The new owners take possession the day after. Diane accepted the mug of tea I offered but didn't drink. Mom, I need to understand something. Are you angry? With us? Is this some kind of punishment? I sat across from her, considering my answer carefully. I'm not angry, Diane. Disappointed, perhaps. Sad, certainly. But not angry. Then why the rush? Why sell the house so quickly? Why move so far away? It's not far, I pointed out. And as for the timing, when you know what you want, why wait? She frowned. Because major life decisions deserve careful consideration. Because those decisions affect other people. Because you feel entitled to input on my choices, I finished for her. Her frown deepened. That's not fair, isn't it? You and James had no problem making decisions that affected me without my input. The Aspen trip, the discussion about selling my house and moving me to a senior facility. That was different, she protested. We were trying to help. By making decisions for me, not with me. I sipped my tea, allowing the silence to stretch. Diane had always been uncomfortable with silence. It was often the quickest way to get her to reveal her true thoughts. Fine, she eventually said. We should have included you in the Aspen plans. That was thoughtless. But using that as justification for upending your entire life seems extreme. It wasn't justification, Diane. It was illumination. It showed me very clearly how you and James view my place in your lives. Her shoulders tensed. And how is that exactly? As an accessory, a convenience, someone whose needs and wants are secondary to yours. That's cruel, Mom. Perhaps. But is it untrue? She stared into her untouched tea. We love you. I know you do in your way. But love without respect isn't enough. Her head snapped up. We respect you. Do you? When have you ever asked what I want for my future? What dreams I might have deferred while raising you? What I might want to do with my retirement years besides babysit and house sit? She opened her mouth, then closed it again, realizing she had no answer. That's not disrespect, she finally said. It's just... You've always been Mom. Steady, predictable, practical mom. We never thought you wanted anything different. Because you never asked. Diane's composure finally cracked. Okay, I'm asking now. What do you want, Mom, besides expensive cruises and beach cottages? I considered the question, the first time either of my children had actually asked. It. I want to travel while I'm still healthy enough to enjoy it. I want to see sunsets over the Mediterranean and sunrises over the Pacific. I want to take art classes and join book clubs and make friends who know me as Ellie, not just as someone's mother or grandmother. I want to stop dividing my life into tiny portions to serve everyone else's needs. And you think moving to Cannon Beach will give you all that? It's a start. The cruise is a start. The rest will unfold as I go. Diane set down her mug with a sharp click. And what about us? What about Sophie? She adores you. Sophie will always be welcome in my home. So will you. But on an honest basis. Because you want to see me, not because you need something from me. A hint of color rose in Diane's cheeks. That's not fair. We don't just see you when we need something. When was the last time you brought Sophie to visit me without asking me to watch her while you ran errands or attended an event? Like, James before her, Diane couldn't answer. I softened my voice. I'm not saying this to hurt you. I'm saying it because it's time for honesty between us. I've enabled this dynamic as much as you've perpetuated it. That's on me. But it changes now. Because of one family vacation? Her voice held a note of disbelief. Because it's time. Because I finally have the courage and the resources to create the life I want, not just the life that's left over, after meeting everyone else's needs. Diane was silent for a long moment, turning her mug in slow circles. Finally, she asked, "Do you even want to be a grandmother anymore?" The question sliced through me like a knife. How can you ask that? I adore those children. Nothing could change that. But you're choosing to move away from them, to prioritize. What? Ocean views? Art classes? Over being present in their lives? I'm choosing to be fully present in my own life, I corrected. Something I haven't done in 35 years. The children will benefit from knowing a grandmother who's whole and fulfilled, not just available on demand. Diane shook her head slowly. I don't understand you anymore. Perhaps you never did. I reached across the table, offering my hand. But we have time. We can learn to know each other as adults, as whole people beyond our roles. She didn't take my hand. This feels like abandonment, Mom. I know, and I'm sorry for that. But sometimes growth requires space. Diane stood abruptly. I should go. Thomas is waiting in the car. He could have come in, I pointed out. He thought, it might be better if we talked alone. She gathered her purse, avoiding my eyes. When do you leave for the cruise? Monday morning. My flight to Barcelona leaves at 10. She nodded, adjusting her jacket. Will you at least send us photos? Let us know you're safe? Of course. I followed her to the door. Diane, this isn't goodbye. It's just change. We'll find our way through it. She paused on the threshold, finally meeting my eyes. James thinks you'll change your mind after the cruise. That you'll realize moving away from family is a mistake. And what do you think? A ghost of a smile touched her lips. I think we've underestimated you for a very long time, Mom. I think you know exactly what you're doing. With that, she walked to her car where Thomas waited, watching us through the windshield. I waved as they drove away, unsure if the ache in my chest was sadness or relief or some complex mixture of both. Back inside, I returned to my sorting. In an old shoebox at the bottom of the hall closet, I found photographs I'd nearly forgotten, pictures from before I had children, a younger version of myself standing on a hiking trail, laughing at the camera, another of me in nursing school, serious in my white uniform, a third from a rare vacation with friends, all of us posing on a beach somewhere, our arms around each other's shoulders. I studied that young woman's face, her easy smile, the confidence in her posture, the light in her eyes. Somewhere along the way between night shifts and mortgage payments and endless self-sacrifice, I'd lost touch with her. But she wasn't gone. She'd been waiting patiently for her time to return. "Hello, old friend," I whispered to the photo. "It's finally your turn." The next few days passed in a whirlwind of activity. The movers came and went, packing the possessions I'd chosen to keep and loading them onto a truck bound for Cannon Beach. The closing on the house went smoothly, the young couple eager and grateful. I signed the final papers with a sense of completion rather than loss. My children made one last attempt at changing my mind, a family dinner at James's house the night before my departure. They'd clearly coordinated their approach, creating a tableau of family togetherness designed to remind me of all I was leaving behind. The grandchildren were scrubbed and on their best behavior, the dining room festive with flowers and candles. "Nana, do you have to go on your boat tomorrow?" Emma asked as we ate dessert. "Daddy says you're going very far away." I shot James a look before answering. "It's a ship, sweetheart, not a boat. And yes, I'm going on a wonderful adventure. But I'll be back in a few weeks, and then you can all come visit me at my new house by the ocean." "With the bunk beds?" Zach asked. His interest piqued. "Exactly. With bunk beds and a window seat where you can watch for whales." "I want to see whales!" Sophie exclaimed. "And you will," I promised. "We'll have a grand time together." "But not as often as before," Melissa murmured, just loudly enough for me to hear. I chose not to engage with the passive aggression. Instead, I turned to my grandchildren with a smile. "I've brought something special for each of you to keep while I'm away." From my purse, I withdrew 3 small, carefully wrapped packages. For Zach, a compass that had belonged to his grandfather. For Emma, a delicate music box my mother had given me when I was her age. For Sophie, a snow globe containing a miniature beach scene complete with a tiny lighthouse. "These are very special to me," I told them as they exclaimed over their gifts. "Just like you are. And when you look at them, you can think of me having my adventure and know that I'm thinking of you too." The children were delighted. Their parents exchanged glances, recognizing that I'd effectively neutralized their emotional leverage. The rest of the evening passed in strained politeness, everyone careful to avoid further mention of my decisions or their feelings about them. As I prepared to leave, James pulled me aside in the foyer. "Mom, I've been thinking about what you said, about not asking what you want. You're right. We never did. So I'm asking now, is there anything I can do for you? Anything that would make you happy?" The question, finally asked with genuine sincerity, touched me deeply. "Yes, James. You can trust that I know what I'm doing. You can respect my choices even when you don't understand them. You can let me discover this new phase of my life without guilt or manipulation." He swallowed hard, then nodded. "I'll try." "That's all I ask." I hugged him tightly. "I love you. That hasn't changed. It never will." Later, as my taxi pulled away from the house I'd called home for 3 decades, I didn't look back. The past had served its purpose, carrying me to this moment, this threshold. Now it was time to cross over into the future I'd chosen for myself. My phone chimed with a text as we turned onto the main road. It was from Diane. "Safe travels, Mom. Send pictures of the Mediterranean sunsets." Perhaps it was a peace offering. Perhaps it was simply resignation. Either way, it felt like a beginning rather than an end. As the taxi drove toward the hotel where I'd spend my last night before flying to Barcelona, I rolled down the window and let the evening air wash over my face. For the first time in as long as I could remember, my shoulders didn't carry the familiar weight of responsibility, of obligation, of endless accommodation. Instead, they felt light, ready for new burdens of my own choosing, ready for adventure, ready for joy. The Barcelona morning greeted me with golden light streaming through floor-to-ceiling windows, casting long shadows across the hotel suite. For a moment, I lay still, disoriented by the unfamiliar surroundings, the distant sound of a language I didn't speak, the absence of the usual neighborhood noises that had been my morning soundtrack for decades. Then it all rushed back. The flight, the elegant hotel, the knowledge that today I would board the ship that represented my first real act of independence in 35 years. I rose and padded to the windows, drawing back the curtains completely. Barcelona stretched before me, terracotta rooftops and modernist spires gilded by early sunlight. Somewhere beyond the cityscape lay the Mediterranean, waiting to receive, the magnificent vessel that would be my home for the next 18 days. My phone buzzed on the nightstand. A text from Dr. Chen wishing me smooth sailing. No messages from my children. Perhaps they had finally accepted that I was truly going through with this. Or perhaps they were employing the silent treatment, hoping I would panic at their absence and reach out in distress. Either way, I felt a curious sense of peace as I prepared for the day ahead. The hotel had arranged a private car to the cruise terminal. As we pulled up to the port, I caught my first glimpse of the ship, a gleaming white leviathan against the azure sky, so massive it seemed to dwarf the surrounding buildings. Grand Ocean Voyager, the crown jewel of Celestial Cruise Line's fleet, newly refurbished and ready for its Mediterranean journey. The driver unloaded my new luggage, sleek navy blue cases with my initials discreetly embossed in silver. A porter appeared immediately, transferring them to a cart with practiced efficiency. I followed him toward the terminal building, where a separate line had been established for suite passengers. "Ms. Parker?" A young woman approached, tablet in hand. "I'm Valeria, your personal concierge for the voyage. If you'll follow me, we have a private lounge where you can complete your check-in while enjoying refreshments." The VIP treatment was jarring after a lifetime of economy class and budget accommodations, but I determined to embrace it without apology. I deserved this. I had earned it through decades of sacrifice and service. The check-in process was swift and seamless. Before I knew it, Valeria was escorting me onto the ship, bypassing the lines of regular passengers waiting to board. We entered, through a soaring atrium where crystal chandeliers cast rainbow prisms across marble floors. A string quartet played softly near a grand staircase, the notes of Mozart floating upward to a domed ceiling painted with celestial scenes. "Your suite is on deck 14, our highest accommodation level," Valeria explained as we entered a private elevator. "You'll have access to the Celestial Lounge, our exclusive restaurant for suite guests, as well as priority reservations at all specialty dining venues." The elevator doors opened directly into a private hallway with only 4 doors. Valeria led me to the farthest one, sliding a keycard into the slot. "Welcome to the presidential suite, Ms. Parker." The door swung open to reveal a space so luxurious it momentarily took my breath away. Floor-to-ceiling windows showcased a panoramic view of Barcelona's harbor. A living room with elegant furnishings flowed into a dining area that could comfortably seat 6. Beyond that, a set of double doors stood open, revealing a bedroom with the largest bed I'd ever seen, draped in fine linens. "This is the main salon," Valeria said, moving further into the space. "Through here is the master bedroom with ensuite bathroom, featuring both a soaking tub and a separate rain shower. The walk-in closet is to your right. There's a guest powder room near the entrance, and this door leads to your private veranda." She slid open a glass door, and I stepped onto a spacious balcony complete with cushioned loungers, a dining table for 4, and even a small hot tub tucked discreetly. In one corner, "This is extraordinary," I managed, trying to absorb the opulence surrounding me. Valeria smiled. "We aim to exceed expectations. Now, your butler, Marco, will be here shortly to introduce himself and help you unpack. In the meantime, may I offer you a welcome beverage? Champagne, perhaps?" I nodded, still somewhat dazed. Champagne would be lovely. She moved to a built-in bar and produced a bottle from a small refrigerator. The cork released with a discreet pop, and she poured the golden liquid into a flute. Your luggage will arrive momentarily. Is there anything else you need right now? I shook my head, accepting the champagne. This is perfect, thank you. After Valeria departed, I wandered through the suite, trailing my fingers over fine fabrics and polished surfaces. The bathroom was larger than my kitchen at home, clad entirely in marble with gold fixtures. The closet could have housed my entire wardrobe 3 times over. Even the smallest details spoke of luxury. Handcrafted chocolates on the nightstand, fresh orchids on every table, a leather-bound portfolio containing personalized stationery. I carried my champagne to the veranda and settled into a lounger, facing the harbor. Barcelona shimmered in the late morning sun, its architecture a testament to centuries of history, art, and human aspiration. Somewhere in that beautiful city, thousands of tourists were dutifully checking off must-see attractions on their itineraries. I had no such obligations. For the first time in my adult life, my time was entirely my own. The realization was simultaneously terrifying and exhilarating. A discreet knock interrupted my reverie. I returned to the living room to find a distinguished man in a formal uniform waiting just inside the door. Ms. Parker, I am Marco, your butler for the duration of your voyage. His accent was Italian, his manner both warm and professional. I see your luggage has arrived. With your permission, I will unpack for you and press anything that requires attention. Another novel experience, having someone else handle such intimate tasks. After a moment's hesitation, I nodded. Thank you, Marco. That would be very helpful. He smiled, recognizing my uncertainty. This is your first cruise? Is it that obvious? Not at all. But I have served many guests over the years, and there is a particular look of wonder that first-time cruisers often wear. It is my favorite expression to see. His kindness put me at ease. Well, you've caught me. This is not only my first cruise, but my first real vacation in a very long time. Then we must ensure it is exceptional. He gestured toward the dining table, where a leather folio lay open. I have taken the liberty of making some preliminary dinner reservations for you, but of course, these can be adjusted to suit your preferences. The captain's welcome dinner is tomorrow evening. Formal attire is customary. Tonight, perhaps you would enjoy Celestial, our private restaurant for suite guests. It offers a tasting menu that changes daily. I glanced at the dining schedule he had prepared. Every detail had been anticipated. Times, venues, dress codes. It should have felt overwhelming, but instead it felt like care. Like being looked after for once, rather than doing the looking after. That sounds perfect, Marco. Thank you. He nodded, satisfied. Shall I unpack now? Or would you prefer some time alone to settle in? Please, go ahead and unpack. I think I'll explore the ship a bit. Very good. Your keycard is programmed to access all VIP areas. The Celestial Lounge on Deck 15 offers complimentary refreshments throughout the day. Will you require an escort to familiarize yourself with the ship's layout? I smiled, finding his formal solicitude endearing rather than intimidating. I think I can manage. I'd like to wander and discover things at my own pace. As you wish. I will be finished with your unpacking by the time you return. Please do not hesitate to call if you require anything at all. As Marco disappeared into the bedroom with my luggage, I collected my purse and keycard and ventured out to explore my floating palace. The Grand Ocean Voyager was a city unto itself, with 16 decks of restaurants, lounges, theaters, shops, and recreational facilities. I wandered through public spaces adorned with art collections worthy of a metropolitan museum. I discovered hidden alcoves with panoramic views, libraries stocked with leather-bound classics, cafes serving exotic coffees from around the world, In a secluded corner of Deck 12, I found a small gallery exhibiting works by local artists from our upcoming ports of call. The curator, a vivacious woman named Isabella, was delighted to find someone interested in the stories behind the pieces. Most passengers only visit on the night of the champagne reception, she confided, showing me a striking abstract inspired by Gaudi's architecture. They see the free drinks, not the art. We chatted easily about the Barcelona art scene, about how creative expression changes with age and experience. When I mentioned I'd be taking watercolor classes at my new home in Cannon Beach, she insisted on showing me a collection of seascapes by a Greek artist who would be joining the ship in Santorini to teach a master class. "You must sign up," she urged. "His technique for capturing light on water is extraordinary." The idea of learning from a master artist while sailing the Aegean was irresistible. I added my name to the class list, feeling a small thrill at committing to something purely for my own enrichment. By late afternoon, gentle vibrations signaled the ship's preparation for departure. I returned to my suite to find the unpacking complete, my clothes neatly arranged in the closet, my toiletries artfully displayed in the bathroom. Marco had left a note indicating he would return at 7 Gand to escort me to dinner if desired. I chose a simple dress from the closet, one of my new purchases, a flowing silk in deep teal that complemented my silver hair. After dressing, I returned to the veranda to watch Barcelona recede as we sailed from the harbor. The departure was majestic, the massive ship gliding silently from its berth, the city's landmarks sliding past in stately procession. Church spires and modern skyscrapers alike diminished as we moved further into open water. Smaller vessels gave way before us, their passengers waving in the time-honored tradition of seafarers. As the coastline became a thin strip on the horizon, I felt a curious mixture of emotions. A tinge of melancholy at leaving solid ground behind, coupled with a surging exhilaration at the adventure ahead. This must be how early explorers felt, I thought, venturing into the unknown with equal measures of trepidation and wonder. The dinner at Celestial was unlike any dining experience I'd had before. A 7-course tasting menu featuring molecular gastronomy, wine pairings selected by a sommelier who explained each choice with poetic enthusiasm, service so attentive it bordered on prescient. I was seated at a table for one but never felt alone. The maitre d' introduced me to fellow diners at nearby tables, a retired judge from London, a widowed art collector from Vienna, a professor emeritus of literature, and his wife celebrating their 50th anniversary. Conversation flowed as freely as the wine. No one asked about my children or grandchildren. No one questioned why I was traveling alone. Instead, they asked about my interests, my impressions of Barcelona, my thoughts on the books displayed in the ship's library. For the first time in decades, I was seen not as a mother or grandmother or nurse, but simply as Ellie, a woman with her own mind, her own tastes, her own presence in the world. When I returned to my suite, I found the bed turned down, soft music playing, and a handwritten note from Marco wishing me sweet dreams. On the nightstand, a small box of artisanal chocolates and tomorrow's program of activities awaited my review. I stepped onto the veranda one last time before retiring. The night was perfect, stars scattered across the velvet sky, the ocean a dark expanse broken only by the ship's reflections on the water. I breathed deeply, filling my lungs with salt air and possibility. This was freedom. This was what I had worked for, sacrificed for, without ever allowing myself to imagine I might experience it. For so long, I had been defined by what I gave to others. Now, for these precious days, I would discover who I was when I gave to myself instead. I slept more soundly that night than I had in years, rocked by the gentle motion of the ship, unburdened by responsibility or obligation. The next morning brought our first port of call, Valencia, with its striking combination of ultramodern architecture and medieval charm. I had signed up for a small group walking tour focusing on the city's food culture. Our guide, Manuel, led us through the sprawling central market, where merchants proudly displayed local produce, fresh seafood, and regional specialties. This building is over 100 years old, Manuel explained, gesturing to the ornate ironwork, and stained glass overhead. But the market itself has operated on this site since the 13th century. We sampled Valencia oranges, their juice sweeter than any I'd tasted before. We tried artisanal cheeses, cured hams, fresh-baked breads still warm from the oven. Manuel taught us to drink horchata, a traditional beverage made from tiger nuts, in tiny ceramic cups at a cafe that had served it the same way for generations. By afternoon, we had moved from the market to small specialty shops tucked away in narrow side streets. In a tiny bakery known only to locals, we watched a third-generation pastry chef create traditional fartons, elongated sweetbread designed specifically for dipping in horchata. "You must try with your hands, not just your eyes," the baker insisted, inviting us to feel the dough's elasticity before it went into the oven. I rolled up my sleeves and plunged my hands into the soft mass, laughing as flour dusted my new dress. The tactile pleasure of creating something with my own hands reminded me of nursing, the importance of touch, of physical presence in a world increasingly dominated by digital distance. When we returned to the ship late that afternoon, I carried with me not only the packages of sweets I'd purchased, but also a deeper appreciation for Valencia's culinary heritage and the artisans who preserved it. I had always enjoyed cooking, but it had primarily been a utilitarian activity, feeding my family within the constraints of a tight budget. Today, I had glimpsed cooking as art, as cultural expression, as joy. The captain's welcome dinner that evening was a formal affair. I wore the midnight blue evening gown I'd purchased specifically for this occasion, its subtle beating catching the light with every movement. As I examined my reflection in the suite's full-length mirror, I barely recognized myself. The woman who gazed back had a straight spine, a lifted chin, an expression of quiet confidence that had been absent for too long. Marco escorted me to the grand dining room, where officers in dress uniforms greeted passengers at the entrance. I was seated at a table hosted by the chief engineer, a Norwegian named Henrik, with a dry wit and a talent for making technical explanations accessible to laypeople. "Most passengers only care about the ship when something goes wrong," he confided after describing the vessel's propulsion system. "It is refreshing to meet someone who asks how things work when they are working perfectly." The conversation around the table was lively and varied. A neurosurgeon from Toronto described his volunteer work with Doctors Without Borders. A retired ambassador shared diplomatic anecdotes that walked the fine line between discretion and revelation. A celebrated cookbook author discussed the challenges of testing recipes while living on a houseboat. When the inevitable question came, "And what about you, Ms. Parker?" I hesitated only briefly before answering. "I was an intensive care nurse for 35 years, I said. "I specialized in cardiac care, though during COVID we all became viral specialists by necessity." "A nurse?" The ambassador's wife clasped her hands. "My sister was a nurse. Such important work and so underappreciated." "You must have stories that would curl our hair," the cookbook author suggested. I smiled. "Patient confidentiality prevents me from sharing the most dramatic ones, I'm afraid." "But surely you can tell us what drew you to nursing," Henrik prompted. "It is a calling, yes? Not merely a profession." The question was thoughtful, genuine. I considered it carefully before responding. "I became a nurse because I wanted to make a difference in people's lives at their most vulnerable moments," I said slowly. "There's an intimacy to it that few other professions offer. Being present when life begins, when it ends, when it hangs in the balance. You see humanity stripped of pretense, for better or worse." "And now?" the neurosurgeon asked. "What calls to you in retirement?" Another thoughtful question, one I might have deflected a month ago with some self-deprecating comment about, grandchildren, or garden clubs. Now, I answered honestly, I'm discovering that. This cruise is part of the exploration. So is the cottage I've purchased in a coastal town. So are the art classes I've signed up for. I spent 35 years helping others navigate critical transitions. Now I'm navigating my own. The neurosurgeon nodded approvingly. The most interesting people are always those in the process of becoming. After dinner, the captain invited all passengers to join him on the open deck for the traditional champagne. Toast! Under a sky ablaze with stars, he welcomed us officially to the voyage, speaking briefly about the history of the vessel and the journey ahead. For millennia, the Mediterranean has connected civilizations, carried commerce, inspired art, and literature, he said, his voice carrying clearly in the night air. To sail these waters is to follow in the wake of Odysseus, Cleopatra, Marco Polo. It is to traverse a sea that has witnessed the rise and fall of empires, the birth of great religions, the flowering of Renaissance brilliance. May your journey be worthy of such illustrious company. Glasses were raised, champagne sparkled in the moonlight, and the ship's horn sounded a deep bass note that seemed to vibrate through the deck beneath our feet. It was theatrical, certainly, but also genuinely moving, a moment of connection with fellow travelers and with the ancient tradition of seafaring itself. Later, as I made my way back to my suite, I passed the ship's photography gallery, where staff photographers had posted candid shots taken throughout the evening. I paused, scanning the displays without really expecting to find myself among them. Then I saw it, a photograph taken during the captain's toast, capturing me in profile as I raised my glass toward the stars. The woman in the image was smiling, her face illuminated by soft lighting, her posture elegant in the midnight blue. Down. She looked content, sophisticated, at ease with herself and her surroundings. She looked like someone I was just getting to know. I purchased the photograph without hesitation, asking the attendant to deliver it to my suite. It would be the first personal item in my new cottage, a visual reminder of this pivotal moment, this rediscovery of self. The days began to take on a rhythm. Mornings in port exploring ancient cities or picturesque villages, afternoons returning to the ship for lectures or leisure activities, evenings of fine dining and entertainment. In Monaco, I toured the palace and the famous casino, marveling at the concentrated wealth of the tiny principality. In Portofino, I hiked coastal trails that offered breathtaking views of the Italian Riviera. In Rome, I skipped the crowded Colosseum, tour in favor of a visit to Ostia Antica, the remarkably preserved ancient port city where ordinary Romans had once conducted their daily business. Each experience added a new dimension to my understanding of the world and my place in it. I was no longer just reading about history or viewing it through the filtered lens of documentaries. I was walking through it, breathing it in, connecting with it directly. The names from textbooks became real places with distinctive scents, sounds, textures. The abstract became concrete, the distant immediate. Throughout the voyage, I found myself drawn to fellow passengers who traveled with curiosity rather than checklists. An Australian couple who had sold their business to spend 3 years exploring the world. A Japanese architect studying Mediterranean, building techniques. A South African botanist documenting native plants in each port. These were people who approached travel not as consumption, but as engagement, who sought understanding rather than mere sightseeing. In Naples, I declined the popular excursion to Pompeii in favor of a culinary workshop with a local family. In their modest home overlooking the Bay of Naples, 3 generations taught our small group to make proper Neapolitan pizza, revealing secrets passed down through the family for over a century. The dough must breathe, the grandmother insisted, in halting English, demonstrating how to stretch it gently without tearing. You must respect it, like a living thing. Her daughter-in-law, more fluent, translated the finer points while her own children, a boy of about 10 and a girl perhaps 12, rolled their eyes good-naturedly at their Nona's passionate pronouncements. "She says this every day to everyone," the boy confided as he helped me shape my crust. "Even to us, and we have heard it all our lives." "That's because it's important," his sister countered. "Tradition matters. Their easy banter, the casual, physical affection between the generations, the obvious pride they took in sharing their heritage, all of it created a warmth that went beyond the heat of the pizza oven." For a few hours, we were not tourists and locals, but simply people connected by food, by laughter, by the universal experiences of family and home. As we sat on their terrace eating the fruits of our labor, the grandmother asked through her daughter-in-law why I traveled alone. "My children are grown," I explained. "They have their own families now." She nodded, understanding perfectly. "And now you live for yourself, yes? This is good. This is right." She patted my hand, her skin papery against mine. "We women, we give and give. Then we must take our turn to receive." Her simple validation, from a woman who had likely never traveled further than Rome, brought unexpected tears to my eyes. She saw me, this stranger from another culture, another generation. She recognized my journey because, in some fundamental way, it was universal. On the tender back to the ship, I found myself seated next to the Japanese, architect Hiroshi, who had also chosen the cooking experience over Pompeii. "Did you enjoy the workshop?" he asked, his English precise and formal. "Very much. It was more than cooking. It was a glimpse into a way of life." He nodded, pleased by my understanding. This is why I chose it also. Buildings tell us how people live, but food tells us how they feel. Both are necessary to understand a culture. We continued our conversation as the tender approached the ship, finding common ground in our appreciation for experiences that went beyond the surface of things. He had studied the work of a Pacific Northwest architect who had designed several buildings in Cannon Beach, and he offered recommendations for books on coastal architecture that might inform my approach to decorating my new cottage. "A home should reflect the spirit of its location," he suggested. "It should serve as a frame for the natural beauty surrounding it, not compete with it." By the time we reached the ship, we had agreed to meet the following day for the onboard lecture about Greek influences on Southern Italian architecture. Another unexpected connection, another thread in the tapestry of experience I was weaving, day by day. That night, as the ship sailed toward Sicily, I stood on my private veranda watching the lights of the Italian coast slip past. A half moon silvered the water, creating a luminous pathway that seemed to stretch infinitely ahead. The vastness of the night sky, the ancient sea below, the distant shores with their millennia of human history, all of it put my own life into perspective. My children's rejection had felt devastating in the moment. Now, against the backdrop of time and distance, it seemed merely sad. Sad for them, sad for me, but no longer definitive. It was one chapter in a longer story, one thread in a more complex pattern. For the first time, I could see my life not just as a series of sacrifices and obligations, but as a journey with its own integrity and purpose. My decisions had value not just in relation to what they gave others, but in what they revealed about me, my character, my priorities, my capacity for both love and independence. The cruise was halfway complete, and already I was a different woman than the one who had boarded in Barcelona. More confident, more curious, more attuned to my own desires and interests. The woman my children knew, the reliable, self-effacing mother who organized her life around their convenience, was receding like the coastline behind our ship, growing smaller against the horizon of possibility ahead. I wondered what they were doing in Aspen, if they thought of me at all. Had my absence created even a ripple in their carefully orchestrated family vacation? Or had I been so peripheral to their real lives that my removal caused no disruption at all? The questions brought a momentary sadness but not regret. Whatever awaited me in the second half of the voyage, whatever awaited me in Cannon Beach, I was moving forward into a life of my own design, a life that honored the woman I had been and the woman I was becoming, a life worthy of the journey. Sicily emerged from the morning mist like a vision from antiquity, its rugged coastline softened by distance and dawn light. I had risen early, drawn to my veranda by some inexplicable anticipation. Perhaps it was the knowledge that today marked the exact midpoint of my voyage, 9 days behind me, 9 days ahead. A perfect balance point between what had been and what was yet to come. As I sipped my morning coffee, watching the island grow larger on the horizon, Marco arrived with a discreet knock, bearing a silver tray with fresh pastries and fruit. "Good morning, Ms. Parker. I see you are already enjoying the approach to Syracuse." "It's beautiful," I said, gesturing toward the panorama before us. "So ancient and yet so alive." "Indeed." He arranged the breakfast tray on the veranda table. Syracuse was once the most powerful city in the Mediterranean world. Even Athens envied its prosperity and culture. "And now it's just another destination on a cruise itinerary," I mused. "Time humbles everything eventually." Marco smiled, appreciating the observation. "Not everything, perhaps. The Greek plays first performed in Syracuse's theater are still staged there each spring, thousands of years later. Some creations transcend their creators." His philosophical bent had been one of the pleasant surprises of the voyage. Behind his formal butler's demeanor lay a thoughtful mind and a poetic sensibility. We had fallen into the habit of these brief morning exchanges, moments of reflection before the day's activities began in earnest. "Will you be joining the archaeological tour today?" he inquired, refreshing my coffee cup. I shook my head. "I've chosen the coastal village's excursion instead. Ancient stones are fascinating, but I'm finding myself more drawn to living communities on this trip." "An excellent choice. The fishing villages along that coastline have changed little in generations. My own grandmother grew up in such a place not far from here." He hesitated, then added, "If you enjoy seafood, there is a small restaurant in the village of Marzamemi that serves the best crudo in Sicily. It is not on the official tour, but the guide might accommodate a request if others are interested." "Thank you for the recommendation. I'll certainly ask." After Marco departed, I lingered over breakfast, watching the methodical approach to the harbor. The ship moved with stately precision, its massive bulk guided by tiny tugboats that strained against the water's resistance. There was something metaphorical in the image, how even the grandest vessels sometimes require humble assistance to reach their destinations. The coastal villages tour exceeded my expectations. Our small group traveled by private minibus along winding seaside roads, stopping at communities where fishing remained a way of life rather than a tourist attraction. In Marzamemi, following Marco's suggestion, our guide Paolo readily agreed to include the recommended restaurant in our itinerary. "Marco has sent you to Trattoria del Mare." Paolo nodded approvingly. "His family has good taste. Salvatore, the owner, still goes out with the boats each morning to select the day's catch himself." The restaurant was unpretentious. Plastic chairs, paper tablecloths, no menu in sight. Instead, Salvatore himself emerged from the kitchen, his weathered face creased with a permanent smile, to describe the day's offerings in rapid Italian that Paolo translated for us. He caught red prawns at dawn, so fresh they still taste of the sea. Also, small squid perfect for frying, and sea urchin that he will serve on bruschetta with only lemon and olive oil. Nothing else needed when the ingredients speak for themselves. We surrendered to Salvatore's expertise, and he rewarded our trust with a progression of seafood so exquisite it silenced our group into reverent appreciation. The prawns were sweet and delicate, the squid tender rather than rubbery, the sea urchin a complex burst of oceanic essence. Each dish was presented simply, without pretension, letting the quality of the ingredients command attention. Between courses, Salvatore's daughter Maria refreshed our wine glasses with a local white that tasted of minerals and sunshine. When she learned I was traveling alone, she paused beside my chair. "My mother traveled alone after my father died," she said in careful English. "Everyone thought she was crazy, a widow seeing the world by herself. But she said those journeys saved her life. She discovered she was still herself, not just someone's wife or mother." "Your mother sounds like a wise woman," I replied. Maria nodded. "She was. She always told me, never postpone joy. It is good advice, I think. Never postpone joy." The phrase echoed in my mind throughout the remainder of the tour, through our visits to a century-old olive press, a family-run ceramics workshop, a tiny chapel overlooking the sea where local fishermen still sought blessing before challenging voyages. Back aboard the ship that evening, I found a message waiting in my suite, an invitation to join the captain's table again the following night as we sailed from Sicily toward Greece. The formal card mentioned that several other solo travelers would be in attendance, including Hiroshi, the Japanese architect I had befriended. I was composing my acceptance when my phone chimed with an incoming text. For a moment, I tensed, expecting another demand from James or Diane. Instead, I found a message from Dr. Chen. "How's the Mediterranean treating my favorite former colleague? Portland seems colorless without your stories brightening the cafeteria. Aspen survivors returned. Notice they avoid mentioning your name. Progress or retreat? Either way, hope you're finding everything you sought and more." The message brought a smile to my face. Robert had always possessed the gift of being supportive, without being intrusive. I sent a quick reply, attaching a photo I'd taken that morning of Syracuse's harbor at dawn. Mediterranean exceeds all expectations. Making friends, eating extraordinary food, learning something new every day. Ship glorious. Weather perfect, but best of all, freedom. Will call when I return to solid ground. Meanwhile, enjoy this sunrise that greeted me today. His response came almost immediately. Living vicariously through that sunrise, can see why painters have been obsessed with Mediterranean light for centuries. Keep collecting moments. They look good on you. I set the phone aside, warmed by the exchange. Robert understood what this journey represented for me in a way my children never could. He saw it not as abandonment or selfish indulgence, but as a necessary claiming of selfhood, too long deferred. The next morning brought us to Taormina, a medieval town perched dramatically on cliffs overlooking the sea, with Mount Etna looming in the background. I had chosen a walking tour focused on literary connections. The town had been a favorite. Retreat for writers and artists for generations, from Goethe to D.H. Lawrence to Truman Capote. Our guide, Francesca, led us through narrow streets to a public garden established by an English aristocrat in the late 19th century. Lady Florence Trevelyan created this paradise after being banished from England, she explained as we entered a leafy sanctuary overlooking the coastline. She had become too close to the future King Edward VII's, Queen Victoria's son, and was told to leave the country, so she came here and channeled her energy into creating beauty. I wandered among exotic plants and curious architectural follies, what Francesca called Victorian beach huts on steroids, that Lady Florence had designed as reading pavilions and contemplation spaces. She found her real purpose in exile, Francesca continued. Sometimes being forced from your comfort zone is the best thing that can happen. Her passion for botany and conservation might never have developed if she had remained in the royal circle. Another woman whose life had been unexpectedly redirected, finding fulfillment in a place she never planned to be. The parallels weren't lost on me. Though my own exile had been self-imposed rather than commanded by a queen, the sense of discovery of possibility felt similar. After the tour concluded, I lingered in Taormina, browsing shops filled with local crafts and savoring a leisurely lunch at a terrace restaurant with panoramic views of the coast. At a nearby table, I noticed an elderly couple who moved with the synchronized rhythm of long partnership. She automatically passing the salt before he reached for it. He quietly moving a candle that blocked her view without being asked. They caught me watching them and smiled warmly. 47 years, the woman said in accented English, correctly interpreting my interest. It doesn't feel so long, does it, Leon? Her husband shook his head, his expression tender. Not long enough, Magda. You're American? She asked. Me. When I nodded, she continued, We are from Austria. This is our 12th visit to Taormina. We return every few years to remember our honeymoon. That's lovely, I said, genuinely touched. 12 visits over 47 years. The town changes, we change, but the joy remains the same, Leon said philosophically. Each visit is both familiar and new. Are you here with your husband? Magda inquired gently. No, I'm traveling alone. My husband passed away many years ago. Her expression softened with understanding. And you never remarried? I was busy raising my children. By the time they were grown, I'd gotten used to independence. It was a simplified version of the truth, but accurate enough. Leon nodded approvingly. Independence is undervalued, especially for women of your generation. My mother never recovered her sense of self after my father died. She had been his wife for so long, she forgot how to be herself. My children think I've lost my mind, I admitted, surprised by my own candor with these strangers. Selling? My house, buying a beach cottage, taking this cruise. They see it as erratic behavior rather than deliberate choice. Children often fail to recognize their parents as complete human beings, Magda observed. To them, we are simply mother or father, roles rather than people with our own dreams and desires. They'll adjust, Leon added confidently. Or they won't. Either way, you must live authentically. That's the greatest gift you can give them, the example of someone who honors their own spirit. Their words stayed with me as I returned to the ship, a gentle validation from unexpected sources. This was becoming a pattern on the voyage. These moments of connection with strangers who seemed to understand my journey intuitively, who offered wisdom without judgment or agenda. That evening at the captain's table, conversation flowed easily among the assembled guests. Besides Hiroshi, there was a retired judge from Edinburgh, a Brazilian oceanographer, a Canadian novelist researching her next book, and a French sommelier who had worked in vineyards across 5 continents. The captain himself, a Norwegian with a dry wit, guided discussions with the skilled diplomacy of someone accustomed to managing diverse personalities in confined spaces. Miss Parker has been exploring living communities rather than ancient stones, he remarked at one point, demonstrating his attention to passenger preferences. What have you discovered about the Mediterranean people that has surprised you? I considered the question thoughtfully. Their relationship with time, I think. There's a paradoxical quality to it. They're surrounded by monuments thousands of years old, yet they're intensely present in the moment. They don't seem rushed or anxious about the future in the way Americans often are. The novelist leaned forward, interested. Yes, exactly. I've been trying to articulate that very quality in my notes. It's as if living among so much visible history gives them a different perspective on the present. Perhaps it is because they see evidence that life continues beyond individual concerns, Hiroshi suggested. In Japan, we have this understanding too, that we are part of a much longer story than our own lifetimes. The conversation expanded from there, touching on cultural attitudes toward time, work, leisure, and aging across different societies. The judge described the Scottish concept of tartling, spending time in purposeless, pleasurable conversation with no particular goal beyond human connection. We've nearly lost the art of it in our productivity-obsessed era, he lamented. Even socialization has become goal-oriented, networking, making contacts, building personal brands. To simply enjoy another's company has become revolutionary. That's what I valued most about this voyage, I found myself saying. These unexpected conversations, these connections that aren't transactional or utilitarian. The ancient Greeks would approve, the captain noted. They believed good. Conversation was the highest form of pleasure, more satisfying than wealth or power. After dinner, several of us continued our discussion in the celestial lounge, reluctant to end the evening. The Brazilian oceanographer ordered champagne for the table, raising her glass in a toast. To purposeless pleasure, she declared with a brilliant smile. May we all remember to make space for it. We clinked glasses, momentarily united by shared understanding. As I sipped the champagne, I realized how rare such moments had become in my previous life. Moments of pure presence, unmarked by obligation or responsibility or concern for others' needs. The following day brought us to Kefalonia, a Greek island, of dramatic beauty, azure waters, white limestone cliffs, verdant valleys flush with olive groves and vineyards. I had signed up for a sailing excursion around the island's coastline, drawn by the prospect of experiencing the landscape from the water. Our vessel was a traditional wooden caique captained by a Greek man named Dimitris, whose family had navigated these waters for generations. As we sailed away from the harbor, he invited passengers to take turns at the wheel under his careful supervision. When my turn came, I felt a childlike thrill as the boat responded to my guidance, cutting smoothly. Through crystal-clear waters, you have good hands, Dimitris observed approvingly. Steady, not fighting the water. I've never sailed before, I admitted. He smiled, his face weathered by sun and salt. Sometimes the things we are good at are the things we haven't tried. Yet, life should be constant discovery, yes? We anchored in a secluded cove accessible only by water. Those who wished to swim dove from the boat's side into water so transparent that fish were visible darting among rocks 20 feet below. Though I hadn't planned to swim, the inviting clarity of the sea changed my mind. I changed into the swimsuit I'd brought just in case and stepped tentatively down the boat's ladder. The water embraced me with startling coolness that quickly gave way to pleasure. I floated on my back, gazing up at the perfect blue sky, feeling weightless and free. How long had it been since I'd allowed myself this simple joy? Years, certainly. Perhaps decades. Dimitris's wife Maria had accompanied the excursion, and she handed out fresh towels as swimmers returned to the boat. When I emerged from the water, she wrapped a towel around my shoulders with motherly efficiency. "Swimming makes you hungry," she declared. "Come, we have lunch ready." The meal she served was a testament to Greek hospitality, spanakopita still. Warm from their home oven, olives from their own grove, feta cheese made by Maria's sister, sweet wine from a local vineyard. We ate family style, passing dishes around the boat's central table, exclaiming over flavors both familiar and new. A young couple on their honeymoon asked Dimitris and Maria how long they had been married. 35 years, Maria answered, exchanging a look with her husband that conveyed volumes of shared history. Any advice for us? The bride asked. Dimitris considered the question seriously. Remember that you are still two people, not one. Like sailing partners, working together toward the same destination, but each with your own role, your own strengths. And never go to sleep angry, Maria added with practical wisdom. Arguments seem bigger in the dark. The simplicity of their advice, delivered without pretension or sentimentality, struck me as profound. Remember that you are still two people, not one. How often had I lost sight of that principle in my marriage, in my parenting, in my relationships generally? How completely had I subsumed my own identity into the roles I played for others? As we sailed back to port, the late afternoon sun gilding the limestone cliffs, I found myself reflecting on the many marriages I had witnessed throughout my life. Frank and I had been happy enough, but his early death had cut short the deeper evolution of our relationship. Had we stayed together, Would we have achieved the easy synchronicity of Leon and Magda in Taormina? The tested partnership of Dimitris and Maria? Or would we have drifted into the polite detachment I'd observed in so many long-married couples, sharing a home but not really seeing each other anymore? There was no way to know, of course. But for the first time, I allowed myself to consider that Frank's death, tragic as it was, had shaped me in ways that might ultimately be valuable. The self-reliance I had developed as a young widow, the independence I had maintained even while dedicating myself to my children, these qualities served me well now as I navigated this new phase of life. The realization wasn't a rejection of grief or a denial of loss, but rather an acknowledgement that even the most painful experiences contribute to the people we become. Every chapter of my story, daughter, wife, widow, mother, nurse, and now this emerging identity as simply Ellie, had its place in the whole. None needed to be erased or regretted for the current chapter to be valid. That evening, as the ship sailed toward Santorini, I attended a string quartet performance in the ship's theater. The program featured Dvořák's American Quartet, music I had loved since college but rarely made time to hear live. As the familiar melodies filled the space, sometimes plaintive, sometimes exuberant, I closed my eyes and allowed the music to wash over me. A memory surfaced unexpectedly, sitting in Boston Symphony Hall as a nursing student, listening to this same piece with a group of classmates. We had splurged on tickets despite our tight budgets, dressing up in our best clothes, thrift store finds mostly, and feeling sophisticated and cultured. How alive I had felt then, how full of possibility and purpose. That younger Ellie had no idea what lay ahead, the joys and sorrows, the gains and losses, but she had been eager to discover it all. I felt a sudden surge of tenderness toward that younger self, and toward all the selves I had been since. Each deserved honor for the path she had walked, the choices she had made with the understanding available to her at the time. If my children could not see the full arc of my journey, could not understand the woman I was becoming now, perhaps that was because they had only ever known fragments of me, the parts visible through the lens of mother. The quartet concluded, with a movement so achingly beautiful it brought tears to my eyes. As the final notes faded, I remained in my seat while others rose to leave, wanting to hold on to the moment a little longer. A hand touched my shoulder gently. Hiroshi, who had been seated several rows behind me. "Music sometimes reaches places words cannot," he said simply. I nodded, grateful for his understanding. "Exactly. Some of us are gathering in the Celestial Lounge for tea. Would you care to join us?" I accepted the invitation gratefully, and soon found myself part of an impromptu gathering of fellow passengers who had attended the concert. The conversation ranged widely, from music to literature to the anticipation of Santorini the following day. I contributed occasionally but was content mostly to listen, appreciating the easy flow of ideas, the absence of agenda or obligation. Later, returning to my suite, I found a small package waiting outside my door, a book on Mediterranean architecture, with a note from Hiroshi. "For your new home by the sea. May it reflect your spirit as clearly as you have shared it with us." The thoughtfulness of the gesture touched me deeply. These connections formed on the voyage, whether fleeting or potentially lasting, were unlike any I had experienced before. They were based not on what I could provide or how I could serve, but simply on who I was in the moment, what I contributed to a shared conversation or experience. Inside my suite, I found the usual evening amenities: turned-down bed, chocolates. On the pillow, tomorrow's program laid out on the nightstand. A handwritten note from Marco informed me that we would arrive in Santorini early the next morning and suggested I might enjoy watching the approach from my veranda, as the ship would sail directly into the island's caldera, the flooded volcanic crater that created one of the most spectacular natural harbors in the world. I stepped out onto the veranda before retiring, gazing up at stars brilliantly visible against the dark canvas of the open sea. Somewhere ahead lay Santorini, though no lights were visible yet on the horizon. The anticipation of that first sighting brought to mind the ancient mariners who had navigated these waters without modern instruments, guided only by stars and experience and faith in their own abilities. How much courage that must have required, setting forth into the unknown, trusting oneself to address whatever challenges arose. In a much smaller way, wasn't that what I was doing now? Setting course for a future I could not fully envision, guided by newly discovered confidence in my own resilience and wisdom? The thought comforted me as I prepared for sleep. Whatever awaited in Santorini, whatever awaited beyond the cruise in my new life at Cannon Beach, I was equal to it. Not because I had all the answers or could anticipate every challenge, but because I had finally recognized my own capacity for growth and adaptation. The woman who had boarded this ship in Barcelona was already transformed by the journey, and the transformation continued with each new experience, each new connection, each new insight. As Marco had predicted, the approach to Santorini proved spectacular. I woke before dawn, drawn to the veranda by some sixth sense that told me we were nearing our destination. The sky was just beginning to lighten, deep indigo giving way to softer blue at the eastern horizon. Ahead, the dark silhouette of the island emerged gradually from shadow, a crescent of steep cliffs embracing the caldera where our ship would anchor. As the first rays of sunlight touched the island's highest points, whitewashed buildings perched impossibly on the cliff tops began to glow, appearing to float between sea and sky. The scene was so breathtaking it seemed almost artificial, like a painted backdrop rather than a real place where real people conducted their daily lives. I watched, transfixed, as we sailed into the caldera itself, the ship dwarfed by towering volcanic walls on three sides. Small tender boats approached from the shore, ready to ferry passengers to the island since no dock could accommodate a vessel of our size. Marco arrived with breakfast, joining me briefly at the veranda table to appreciate the view. "Every time I see it, it still astonishes me," he admitted. "Nature's power and human determination creating something neither could achieve alone." "It's almost too beautiful," I said, struggling to articulate the feeling the landscape evoked. "Like looking at something your eyes aren't quite designed to process." He nodded, understanding perfectly. "The Greeks have a word for it, ekplyktiko. It means something so beautiful it strikes you almost like a physical blow." Ekplyktiko. Yes, that captured it exactly. Beauty with the force of percussion, momentarily stunning the senses. "You have the watercolor class this afternoon," Marco reminded me, consulting his notes, "with the Greek artist Alexandros." "I'd almost forgotten," I admitted. "With this view, how could any amateur painting do it justice?" Alexandros says, "It is not about doing justice to the view, but about recording your personal response to it. Each person sees something different, even when looking at the same landscape." The observation stayed with me as I prepared for the day ahead. Each person sees something different, even when looking at the same landscape. How true that was, not just for physical vistas but for all of life's experiences. My children and I had witnessed the same family events, the same interactions, yet interpreted them through entirely different lenses. Neither perspective was wholly right or wrong, just different angles on a complex reality. Perhaps that understanding was the beginning of wisdom, or at least of compassion, recognizing that others' views were shaped by their own needs, fears, hopes, and histories, just as mine were. It didn't excuse hurtful behavior, but it offered a path toward comprehension, if not complete reconciliation. As I boarded the tender for Santorini, these thoughts receded before the immediate sensory experience of the island. The approach by boat revealed the full drama of the landscape: volcanic cliffs rising hundreds of feet from the sea, layers of black, red, and white stone testifying to ancient eruptions, clusters of white buildings clinging to the seemingly vertical surface like snow on a mountainside. The morning excursion took us to the archaeological site of Akrotiri, a Bronze Age settlement preserved under volcanic ash like a Greek version of Pompeii. Our guide, Elena, led us through streets and buildings abandoned in haste more than 3,500 years ago when the volcano first showed signs of imminent eruption. Unlike Pompeii, no human remains were found here, she explained as we examined frescoes, still vibrant with color after millennia. The inhabitants had warning, perhaps earthquakes or gas emissions, and evacuated before the major eruption. They took their valuables, their religious icons, even their furniture. They expected to return, but they never did. The eruption that followed was one of the largest in human history, fundamentally altering the Mediterranean world. Some scholars connected it to the legend of Atlantis, an advanced civilization suddenly swallowed by the sea. Standing in those ancient rooms, I felt an unexpected kinship with the long-vanished residents. They, too, had planned for a future different from the one that arrived. They, too, had made choices based on the information available to them at the time. They, too, had left behind one life expecting to return to it, only to find themselves thrust into entirely new circumstances. The archaeological site, profound as it was, served as prelude to the watercolor class that afternoon. The classroom space was a covered terrace at a small art center in Oia, the most picturesque of Santorini's villages. 8 of us gathered around tables positioned to capture spectacular views of the caldera, the volcanic basin now filled with seawater so intensely blue it seemed artificially colored. Alexandros, our instructor, was a man of about 60, with the weathered complexion of someone who spent most days outdoors. He greeted each student individually, taking time to learn names and backgrounds before beginning the formal lesson. Watercolor is the perfect medium for Santorini, he told us, arranging paper and paints at each station. It captures the transparency of the light here, the fluidity of the landscape where sea and sky seem to merge. He demonstrated techniques for suggesting rather than defining structural elements, how a few precise lines could indicate a building's form, how layered washes of color could create the illusion of distance and atmosphere. His approach was liberating for those of us with limited artistic experience, not attempting photographic accuracy, but rather emotional resonance. "What do you feel when you look at this view?" he asked us. "Paint that feeling. If you try to capture every detail, you will only frustrate yourself. But if you capture the essence, the quality of light, the relationship of forms, you will create something true even if it is not exact." I found myself fully absorbed in the process, losing track of time as I experimented with color and form. My initial awkwardness gave way to unexpected enjoyment as I learned to embrace imperfection, to allow the water and pigment to interact in ways I couldn't entirely control. Alexandros moved among us, offering individualized guidance. When he reached my station, he studied my work thoughtfully. "You have good instincts," he said, indicating areas where I had successfully suggested the curving lines of whitewashed buildings against the blue backdrop. "You are not fighting the medium but working with it." "Thank you," I replied, surprised and pleased by his assessment. "It's my first attempt at watercolor since grade school." He nodded, unsurprised. Sometimes we discover talents later in life, because earlier there was no space for them to emerge. The seeds were always there, waiting for the right conditions. By the end of the 3-hour session, each of us had produced several studies of the Santorini landscape. None were masterpieces, but all captured something authentic about the place and our response to it. Alexandros mounted the works on a temporary display board so we could appreciate each other's perspectives. How? 8 people looking at the same view had created 8 distinctly different interpretations. "Take these home," he urged as we carefully packed our paintings for transport back to the ship. "Not just as souvenirs, but as reminders that you are capable of seeing the world freshly, of creating something from that vision. This capacity does not diminish with age. It can grow stronger if we nurture it. As I prepared to leave, he added a final observation that resonated deeply. In Greece, we have a saying, "To understand the sea, you must leave the shore." Sometimes distance gives us clearer perspective, yes? On landscapes, on life, on ourselves. I carried his words with me as I made my way through Oya's narrow streets back to the tender point. To understand the sea, you must leave the shore. How true that had proven in my own journey. Only by stepping away from familiar roles and routines had I begun to comprehend the larger patterns of my life, to recognize possibilities previously invisible to me. The ship departed Santorini at sunset. The island's famous blue-domed churches and pastel buildings bathed in golden light as we sailed away. I watched from my veranda, attempting to commit the scene to memory while knowing that no mental image could fully capture its visceral impact. As twilight deepened into full darkness, the island's lights twinkled like earthbound stars against the black volcanic cliffs. Even in recession, Santorini maintained its power to inspire awe, perhaps even more so as distance transformed the tangible place into memory and feeling. Marco appeared with evening refreshments, pausing to appreciate the view alongside me. "Santorini remains with you long after you leave it," he observed. "It becomes a reference point. Other places are beautiful, but they are beautiful in a different way." "I think I understand what you mean," I replied. "It's singular." He nodded, satisfied with the description. Tomorrow we reach Athens, the final port before we begin our return journey westward. How quickly 18 days can pass. The reminder sent a small pang through me. Despite my excitement about the cottage in Cannon Beach, about beginning my new life there, I felt a distinct reluctance to see this voyage end. On board, I had discovered a version of myself previously unexpressed, curious, adventurous, open to new experiences and connections. Would I be able to maintain that self once I returned to American soil, once the practical matters of settling into a new home demanded attention? As if reading my thoughts, Marco added, "The true art of travel is bringing home not just souvenirs but transformation, taking what we have learned and allowing it to reshape our everyday lives." "Is that possible, do you think?" I asked. "Or does the old reality eventually reassert itself?" He considered the question seriously. "I believe it depends on intention. Travel can be either escape or education. If we approach it as temporary release from our real lives, then yes, reality reasserts itself when we return. But if we travel to discover truths about ourselves and the world, those discoveries remain available to us wherever we are." His perspective comforted me. The insights gained during this voyage, about my capacity for joy, for independence, for meaningful connection outside familiar roles. These were not location-dependent. They were internal shifts that could accompany me back to Oregon, informing the next chapter of my story. Athens awaited tomorrow, with its ancient wisdom and modern energy. Then the westward journey would begin. Mykonos, Corfu, Dubrovnik, Venice, before returning eventually to Barcelona, where the circular voyage would complete itself. But I would not be the same woman who had embarked 18 days earlier. The external itinerary might be circular, but the internal journey moved ever forward, each experience building upon the last, creating a person both familiar and new. As the last lights of Santorini faded from view, I felt a curious sense of anticipation rather than loss. Whatever lay ahead, on the remainder of the cruise and beyond, I was ready to meet it with the confidence of someone who had finally recognized her own resilience, her own capacity for growth and adaptation, her own worthiness of joy. Never postpone joy. Maria's mother had been right. The time for living fully was always now, regardless of age or circumstance. I had postponed long enough. The cottage welcomed me with the gentle embrace of ocean air and filtered sunlight. After 18 transformative days at sea and across country, flight, I stood in the doorway of my new home, breathing in the scent of cedar and salt. The moving company had arranged the furniture according to my instructions. My reading chair positioned by the window overlooking the beach. My grandmother's desk nestled in the sunroom where morning light would make writing a pleasure. I wandered, from room to room, rediscovering possessions carefully selected from my former life and finding them transformed by their new setting. The watercolor paintings from Santorini, now professionally framed, added vibrant touches to clean white walls. The photograph from the captain's dinner, me in the midnight blue gown raising a glass to the stars, occupied a place of honor on the mantel. The cottage felt both familiar and new, like a melody I'd always known arranged in a different key. Smaller than my Portland house, but more thoughtfully designed, with nothing superfluous or merely habitual. Every item, every arrangement represented a conscious choice rather than accumulated circumstance. I stepped onto the back deck, where weathered stairs led directly to the beach. The Pacific stretched before me, vast and changeable, so different from the Mediterranean's intimate azure. Here the water was steely blue-gray, powerful and untamed, with waves that spoke in constant thunderous whispers. I had deliberately chosen this wild northern coastline over more manicured beaches. Something about its raw honesty called to me, its refusal to be anything but exactly what it was. Cannon Beach Village lay a short walk away, its main street, lined with galleries, bookshops, and cafes. I had already joined the community center, signed up for those watercolor classes, introduced myself to neighbors. Tomorrow I would attend my first meeting of the local book club, bringing homemade cookies and opinions about the month's selection. Small steps toward building connection in this place I had chosen for myself. My phone chimed from inside the cottage. A text alert. For a moment I considered ignoring it, reluctant to break this peaceful homecoming with demands from the outside world. But curiosity won out. Perhaps it was Dr. Chen checking that I'd arrived safely, or Hiroshi sending architectural insights for my new space. The message was from James. The twins' school play is next Friday at 7. They're asking if Nana will come. Let me know if you need directions to the cottage after. No accusations, no emotional manipulation, just a simple invitation accompanied by acknowledgement, however minimal, of my new living situation. Progress of a sort. I texted back. Wouldn't miss it. We'll drive in Friday afternoon. Might be nice if they could visit the cottage sometime. The bunk beds are ready and waiting. His response came quickly. They'd like that. Maybe during spring break? Perfect, I replied, adding a simple heart emoji, an olive branch extended across the digital divide. I returned to the deck, watching gulls wheel against the darkening sky as sunset painted the ocean in impossible colors. The magnificent cruise ship was thousands of miles behind me now, but its lessons remained, about possibilities, about connections, about the courage to create a life of my own design. Somewhere in Aspen, my children and their families were adjusting to the reality of a mother who had stepped outside their expectations. The path to true understanding might be long, might never be fully realized. But we had taken first steps toward a new relationship based on mutual respect, rather than obligation. The evening breeze carried the scent of wild roses from a neighboring garden. I breathed deeply, filling my lungs with the perfumed air of this coast that was now my home. Tomorrow would bring new experiences, new challenges, new joys. I was ready for all of it. As darkness fell completely, I turned toward the warm light spilling from my cottage windows. Inside awaited books to read, paintings to attempt, letters to write, dreams to nurture. A life no longer postponed but fully, vibrantly present. I stepped through the doorway, closing it gently behind me. Not an ending, but a beginning. My beginning, at last. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.